All right, we're rolling.
Woohoo!
All right, thanks so much for coming on and talking to me,
My
Gil.
pleasure.
So, the question's always where to start. I'll give a brief intro, before on the podcast, but for folks who don't know, you as a anatomist and dissectionist, and as well as a um, philosopher and poet and a rolfer or trained as a rolfer and Taiji and movement guy, embodiment guy, all kinds of things. Anything you want to add to that before we narrow the focus a little? And a dad.
Uh,
I know you're a
yeah,
dad.
yeah, that's probably the number one job that I've really worked on.
Yeah.
The rest is all just extracurricular to that, but my kids are out of the house now, so
Oh,
they grew up, they got big.
they do that. I'm still waiting on mine. I got one out of the house, but I got a few more
Oh,
catching up.
oh yeah, what are
Yeah.
your kids' ages?
I've got three by blood and two step kids. So
All right, wow.
yeah, 20-year-old daughter, 16-year-old son, 16-year-old stepdaughter,
Hmm.
13-year-old stepson, 11-year-old son. So
Wow.
they're winning at this point, but
You're heavily outnumbered.
yes, very much.
That's great.
Um, well, so let's jump in a little bit. There's a lot of things I'd love to talk to you about, but we clearly have to talk about fascia a little bit.
Okay.
Um, and you just got back from the fascial conference. Is that?
I was I was in Berlin and then Guben. I was in Berlin doing a talk for a bunch of yin yogi teacher, advanced teacher trainees.
Nice.
That was I did a talk called "Sex and the Sacred Heart." It was an experiment, and it was really fun.
Sounds
And
fun.
then yeah, and I went to Guben, which is out in the at the Polish border. You basically got to eat and get your groceries in Poland, and that's where Gunther von Hagen's Planetarium is located, right on the Polish border in eastern Germany.
Nice.
And so I spent a week there. Robert Schleip and Carla Stecco were holding a course for folks involved in the fascial net plastination project. So folks came from all over the world for that, and I chipped in down in the lab and did a bunch of lab sessions and worked with the group down there.
That sounds like a pretty amazing group to
It
be working
was
with.
what a really a high level
Yeah.
commitment group. I mean, these people are fanatics, you know.
Yeah.
So it was really an honor to have a chance to just hang out with the group, no less try and offer them anything. It's some groups are more intimidating than others in terms of like, "Oh, really, y'all folks have been with me for years and years. What do I got to say to you?" But it turns out I can keep the rap going.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what's nice. It's like, oh, I actually the thing is I'm learning on the fly, and that is in itself fun to be around,
Yeah.
just to see a learning process, because we're all in a learning process. I don't pretend I know everything. I don't know crap.
Y-
So I don't know what your audience is, but I'm from Jersey, I'm pretty
oh,
rough in the mouth. So,
let it fly. Let it fly, please.
okay, great. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Um,
helpful. Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, any highlights from that you can share?
Um,
You,
it was really fun to just to learn,
yeah.
from Robert and Carla, and there's a fellow there named John Sharkey who's also involved in fascist stuff. He teaches in Dundee in Scotland. Of course, Robert's in Germany and Carl's in Italy. But just to be together with those colleagues and see how they go about things. We have differences of opinion on a whole bunch of stuff, but uh, that's to be expected when intelligent people are looking at a complex thing.
Yeah.
So I expect differences of opinion, but what was really nice was how sweetly we all managed our differences and learned from each other, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, so that was really neat, and I did have a chance to stand. It would have been a long standing hope that I could do a little dissection with Carla in particular, because she um, she just sees things a little differently than I do. And it was really rich to stand there over a cadaver, which is the ultimate boss, you know,
Yeah.
and to be like, you say this about it, I say that about it. It turns out that the cadaver says both, you know. So
Interesting.
it was really interesting. Yeah, it was just because, you know, our own minds, when we try and organize and schematize and put things in boxes. It's just what our brain does. And the body resists that. It resists our boxes. And so anyone who shows up with a bunch of boxes, as we all do, are going to have those categories and things frustrated by the experience. So you have to be either frustrated and insist that it go your way when it won't, or you can just sort of get on the roller coaster and take the ride with the actual human form and let it tell you a thing or two.
Yeah.
And so I think we all enjoyed that experience.
Well, and that's something I've always really appreciated about you and your approach is that, and you so clearly appreciate the interconnectedness. I mean, and fascia is the perfect metaphor, you know, within the body as well, because for so long, you know, a lot of us were taught these kind of individual muscles and individual motions, and there certainly were people who questioned that, but it was kind of easily dismissed, you know, by a lot of the real kind of intellectual heavy hitters. You know, it was hard to kind of stand up for, you know, for the
Yeah,
interconnectedness without sounding completely woo woo.
that's true.
And a lot of what you've done is actually, you know, to in a sense dissect the web, you know,
Yeah.
and to demonstrate how absolutely interconnected it all is, and
The body insists that it's connected no matter what we do.
yeah.
And that's been my hugest lesson for the whole career has been, I mean, you can say there are no parts, but then they're in the book and they have their own page dedicated to them and there's a quiz on them next week. So, you know, we function as if there are parts mentally, but, you know, you can't get one without a knife.
Right.
And so the kind of, you know, there's all these metaphors about like a photograph and then a photographic negative, or the, you know, the anatomy, and then the connective tissue is like the negative of that. And there's a lot of truth in that, but it's really neither, because it's just one continuity and we've just paid attention to one aspect of the continuity, and
Mm-hmm.
connective tissue is another aspect of the continuity. So I can't even say that I'm a fascia guy. I'm more like an integral anatomy guy who, because I've, you know, spent a lot of time hanging out with the tissue that usually ends up in the bucket, you know, end up having a reputation as being a fascia guy. But it's really the whole kit and caboodle that stuns me.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the lesson of showing up at the table expecting parts and then finding no parts,
Mm-hmm.
except for differences in texture. You know,
Hmm.
there's just what you find is shifting textures, and uh, but difference does not, you know, impute separation. It's just something that can be perceived. So, you know, the head produces these categories and boxes and separates what it sees as different.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty convinced that the heart just doesn't work that way.
Right.
That our heart intelligence, the way that we perceive when we are perceiving from a heart-centered place, is a mode of perception that accepts connection. And so I find that the dissection method, as I bring it to the table that I do, tends to throw people into a heart space and see connection rather than chunks and bits and pieces. Uh,
That's a cool observation.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there's a lot of richness in there. But going back to what you're saying, you know, even though you're thought of as a fascia guy, you're more into the whole. You're into all of it. But
yeah,
but still, that's one of the, because it was the stuff that got thrown in the bucket. It was the stuff that got cut away and overlooked. And I mean, it's a yin structure conceptually and physically.
mm-hmm.
And so there's something. to you, you're just looking at all of it, but that included the stuff that was normally discarded. Of course, notable
Yeah,
exceptions. People have certainly, you know, noticed fascia before.
sure.
I had a Rolf and a number, body workers and osteopaths. But
Oh, and way before her,
yeah,
fascia was, but lots of things get noticed and forgotten.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
pretty common in anatomy. Curricular change,
yeah.
and then, I mean, the medical establishment basically forgot the enteric nervous system for 50 or 60 or 70 years. They had it. It was in
Huh,
the books. They taught it. And then it got dropped out of the curriculum. They had to like discover it all over again.
huh. That's interesting.
Uh,
I didn't know that.
yeah.
Yeah, but it just goes back to what you initially were saying about these mental categories,
Yeah.
and there's kind of a widespread reevaluation of our categories of a lot of things, but including the body, and
Hmm.
how that relates to everything.
Very good. Yeah. The body itself as the category is a separated entity.
Right.
And I'm not so sure. In other
Right.
words, the same way that I've been thrown back into connection,
Hmm.
looking at a physical body in
Hmm.
its intrinsic unity, has put me on the watch when I casually talk about a body,
Hmm.
uh, to question that independent that notion of an independent body. And so I have two favorite questions that have been driving me my whole life. Who am I?
Hmm.
And what is my body? What is my body? So if I, if I think that this is my body, well, that's interesting.
Hmm.
But, lately I've started thinking about the human body, not this human body, but all the human bodies as representing the human body, so that our collective human body um, represents each and every one, each and every variation, an expression of the human body
Hmm.
that's legitimate. So that whatever average might end up in an anatomy book is really not the human body.
Right.
Your body is a perfect representation of the human body, even though it looks different than mine or my neighbor's. And so I feel like when you start with um, the variation as the starting point. I
Hmm.
got to shut this door because I got guys working downstairs. Um, you have to rethink what is the human body, and it's like, oh, I'm participating in a larger thing, you know,
Yeah.
when I'm in this, and that larger thing is actually cooperating.
Hmm.
Um, just watch as the Earth turns and goes in and out of the sun's rays. The human body, part of it falls asleep, and part of it's waking up,
Right.
and and you can't resist these forces.
Yeah. Yeah.
In other words, our our participation in the influences of the master gland,
Right.
that is the sun
Hmm.
or the moon, or just the solar radiation in general washing over the planet and affecting it's biologically active stuff.
Yeah.
And so what is it acting on? It's acting on the human body, and and our own, heart waves, which extend far beyond our skin level, is no less my body, and
Yeah.
then when I'm walking past another human being, or a tree for that matter, there's an interaction going on that's biologically active. I can be conscious of it or not conscious of it. It doesn't keep it from being as real as any process going on inside my skin. So why do I limit what I call my body to the processes that are happening inside my skin when there are processes happening beyond my skin that are interactive and change my perception of the world and change the way my DNA unfolds, the
Right.
way my heart beats, the way my liver jiggles?
Just different densities and textures.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think if we could actually, to use an old word, grok, if we could actually grok that larger experience, I think it really undermines our tendency to kill each other. So,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, that's kind of the big dream, you know. Although maybe we need to do that too. Who am I to judge? You know?
Well, I mean, even on I mean, outside of the person to person, I mean, that's part of what's life eats life, and so even the sacred
Exactly.
hunt,
Yeah. I acknowledge that. I had soldiers in my class
hmm
and realized, oh, some people, come to this planet to play war, not just to play hopscotch. My ancestors came and played war,
hmm
and talk about feeling alive. I mean, you feel alive when bullets are whizzing past your head and you're, bleeding.
yeah,
And really, those are the things that we take away with us from a life experience. Are those intense moments of aliveness. So I think that's probably as good as any way to experience that and to experience heroism and caring for your friends and doing your best and all that stuff.
yeah. There's a strange beauty and virtue even that can come out of horrific things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
but it was more just riffing about, like, even, I mean, you can experience complete oneness in your garden as you rip off a tomato and
Yeah,
violently
that's right.
crush it and consume it,
Yeah.
um, and
Yep.
and so there's a strange paradox even about that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, vegetarians are not safe
none of
from
us are.
violence, right? I mean, you can
Yeah,
practice ahimsa, but at some point you just gotta leave the planet because
yeah.
it's a violent planet.
I remember when I was a kid, I was very enchanted by the Jains,
Mm-hmm.
that sect of Hinduism that, they'll sweep in front of them so they don't step on any bugs, and they'll wear masks so they don't breathe in bugs by accident. And it's a beautiful philosophy. It's quite all-consuming, though. I mean, that has to be
Well,
left
there's a certain level of scrupulosity that can overwhelm, because
yeah.
I don't know if there are any Jain molecular biologists, but if they
Right.
are, they're going to be
Right.
feeling pretty guilty. You
Yeah,
know,
they do a
the
lot of penance.
microbiome does not survive us scratching.
Yeah,
Like, oh shoot, there goes a population, or a little bit of deodorant, and
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 that's
you've
and yeah, that's the thing.
wiped
It
out
gets
millions.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes absurd.
Yeah.
Beautiful but absurd. I mean,
Hmm.
but that's that interconnectedness. And it's like,
Yeah. Well, then again, it does. It's a very undermining of many things to really take that on deeply. It undermines perception. It undermines morality. Uh, I mean, I trained as an ethicist. When I look at the world from a more, Advaitist perspective, it kind of breaks down a lot of the moral categories that I was raised with.
can you say any more about that?
Well, I mean, if everything is one, then
Mhm.
is cause and effect is kind of irrelevant. It kind of breaks down. Cause and effect breaks down when you acknowledge the indivisible unity of consciousness.
Gotcha.
And so, while a lot of moral systems are based on the sense of immediate cause and effect,
Right.
you do right and you do wrong, and you're responsible for those actions and their proximate results, right?
Right.
So if you caused it, it's your fault and you bear responsibility.
You reap what you sow.
Yeah, all that stuff, right? And that was my bread and butter. That was what I breathed for all my academic career. But as I age and learn some of these other philosophies, and sometimes, resist, and sometimes I'm forced to yield to
Hmm.
those types of perception, it kind of throws me back on my heels as a PhD in ethics,
Hmm.
to think, it is a little more complicated to assign responsibility than you might think. And it also even throws you back on your heels with respect to agency.
Hmm.
Who is acting? Who
Right.
am I? What is my body? So who is acting when an action happens? It's deep ponderings, and I won't pretend I've gotten to the bottom of it. All I can say is those sorts of questions still interest me deeply. I take them very personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. It's hard to know where to go from there. I mean, those are some foundational.
Yeah.
Who am I and what is my body? These are good questions. So,
Yeah.
so clearly, your path has been, those have been guiding forces on it.
Yeah.
But even back to the causality and linear versus this more web-like organic, just like the structures. It's easy to look at cause and effect, but then we have to ignore a lot of other stuff.
Well,
We have to cut a
exactly. I
lot of
mean,
stuff away.
in Euclidean geometry, there are straight lines,
Hmm.
and you can sort of theoretically identify points along those lines that precede and follow one another, and that's the kind of the representation of the sense of cause and effect. But when there's a web, you know, and everything is pulling on everything, then and there's a fractal ingress that's infinite, then to say this caused that is kind of almost silly or presumptuous, as if there weren't every other factor in the universe impinging on the placement, status, tension, and 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 direction of force going through that web.
Yeah.
So who
Yeah.
done it?
No, this is actually, I sort of think about this sort of thing frequently, not quite in the same, not quite the same framework you're talking about, but it makes it hard for me to speak, because in order to speak, I have to reduce something to a soundbite, and it's at what point do I reduce it and it becomes false? You know,
I I follow that line as well. And in
yeah,
fact, I'm fond of saying everything I do with my scalpel is a lie, and that my words are just another form of scalpel.
yeah,
That are the scalpel I put to the body takes a whole thing and makes parts out of it. It can't be true. It doesn't mean it's not a valuable exercise to put a scalpel to a body, because by the process of dissecting, I can palpate the relationships that I'm severing. I can get a sense, how hard did I have to cut, right? And that tells me something about the relationships that are there. So you can use a scalpel to make parts, but you can also use a scalpel to perceive the quality of relationships, which is what I like to do with my scalpel. And the same thing with words. All my words do is slice up consciousness and reality into digestible pieces that we can exchange lies about, basically, much as you say. And I think that even in this moment, I have only the most, juvenile grasp of connection. And that's why I keep talking, right? But I think, much as you're saying, once you really get it, then you fall silent. And I think that's what happens to many
yeah.
quiet teachers living simple lives, is that they just stop talking because they realize it's just blowing shit. You know?
I've definitely known a few folks that fit that description.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's cool. But then, as you say, you know, it's like you get to know the thing, even if the thing is a false category, even if the body is not entirely a true category, but you get to know it, and then what was the word you the infinite fractal the fractal ingresses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I heard you say that watching one of your dissection videos, and I was like, what a beautiful and
Mm.
accurate. I can clearly see what you're talking about, and what a
Mm.
beautiful concept, and completely shatters the, the kind of more linear, boxy, clean cut
Yeah.
notions, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And yet again, it's like, yeah, okay, as you say, how true is any of it, but you get to know it and you explore it, and then the words are just representations for
Yeah.
a relationship that gets
Mm-hmm.
deeper and deeper over time.
Yeah. And I think when we're in the word stage,
Hmm.
that's what we have to work with. Might as well run with it and do our best to be conscious of the limitations, even while we employ the models that words spin.
Hmm.
It's because you can be a total sucker and actually believe the words coming out of your mouth, or you can at least acknowledge at some level periodically, the limitations. And I think that makes for empathy,
Hmm.
because it's like, okay, I'm giving a shot spinning a yarn, you're giving a shot spinning a yarn. That's the best either of us can do, and to get super aggressive about asserting, my illusion over someone else's, it sort of puts you, in your place a little bit. It's humbling
Yeah.
to just remember the inadequacy that our modeling capacity suffers.
Yeah. Yeah. Even like, so I can relate, like doing body work. I mean, that's most of what I've done for 20 years, and
Mm,
was working on people, and I've had, I've studied, and had good teachers, and for some of it I have words and techniques for, but a lot of what I've done, I've just learned kinesthetically sideways
mm,
by feeling
mm,
the different textures and tissues, and
yeah.
then I've had different models of the body
Hmm.
that I work from, and have
Yeah.
noticed, and I'll come up with different ideas depending on what model I'm really absorbed
Hmm.
in, and
Yeah.
I'll get different results depending on the model I'm absorbed in,
Hmm.
you know, and
Yeah.
and it's like, I know there's truth under that, but I don't know, it's a bit fuzzy, and people ask me all the time when I'm, "Oh, what are you doing now? What are you doing?" It's like, well, I'm trying to take a four-dimensional feeling and sensation that I'm working with and translate that into words, and then overlay that on a anatomical model that I know is only partly accurate, you know. And so a lot of times I just go, I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Well, that's the ultimate truth, is we don't know. And also depending upon where a particular client or, person on a table may be,
Hmm.
you know, in order for them to re-engage in the process from the question, they might just need to be told, "Oh, I'm working on your psoas," it's like, and they're like, "Oh, all right, he's working on my psoas," and then they let it go
Right.
and go back to feeling.
Right.
you know because if we really tried to explain it, well, A, it's impossible, and B, it's bullshit, whatever. So I mean, I'm embarrassed that I'm always quoting myself, but I love the notion that we would, hold our good practices uh, dearly, and our theories about them very lightly, our
Mm.
explanations very lightly, because they tend to be just crock.
I like
uh,
that. Hold
yeah,
hold the practices dearly and hold the
yeah.
explanations lightly.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever it is you're doing that's helping, keep doing that and cherish your capacity,
Yeah.
right? But whatever explanation you gave today, hopefully it'll change tomorrow, because we know the one you gave today is wrong. Or
Yeah.
extreme, so partial, like you said, so partial as to be false.
Yeah.
So gross a reduction as to be false. And yet that is literally all we've got. So, I still keep working with my scalpel. People are like, what can you learn from dead bodies? I'm like, oh, pretty much everything I know. I mean, I got to come back to the kindergarten guy. Everything I know, I learned in kindergarten. Like everything I knew, everything I've learned has been, I've learned from a cadaver.
Yeah.
And what is that thing? You know, what is that thing? What's a cadaver? I mean, when you hang out with cadavers a bunch, it makes you really curious about like, what's the difference? It's just an obvious difference.
Right.
It's kind of still, it's hard to put your finger on. I mean, I'm moving, it's moving slower. I mean, there's still movement going on there, right? In other words, molecules are spinning around, electrons are jumping off of it and onto me and back and forth. Like, so there's even continuity even there. But there's just something about something that was breathing that's not breathing that is like a line in the sand,
Yeah.
that just is a profound difference, and it really makes you question then. So what is that type of body versus this type of body, an animate body versus an inanimate body? Really, what's the difference? I mean, doesn't talk back, makes them easier to hang out with, etc.
Especially when you're using a scalpel.
Yeah. Oh, they have talked back in my dreams, believe me.
Oh, wow.
But
Well, yeah. Well, on that note,
yeah, when I started out doing this, I mean, I didn't really have an anatomy dissection teacher. That part I figured out on my own.
you just jumped in. You just said, I want to
Yeah,
start working with cutting up bodies, and
yeah,
cool.
pretty much, yeah. So,
How long ago was
yeah,
that?
I really had my first chance to dissect back in grad school. So that was
Mm-hmm.
a long time ago. That was in the early 90s. I had a friend in med school, and I was already in the pre-training at the Rolf Institute for massage before learning how to do Rolfing. And so I'd had some exposure. Tom Myers was the anatomy teacher back then there.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, so I had the benefit of a few weeks in class with Tom,
Nice.
which, was all I could say I had, but it was more than my med student friend had, and so he'd invite me in on Saturdays, and they would have dissected an arm during the week, say, and then they're going to have a test the next Monday on that arm, but they didn't have time to dissect the other arm. So I'd go in on Saturday, and while he studied the dissected arm, I would dissect the undissected arm. And we did that I did that maybe 4 times. So I had 4 chances to go into the lab and just noodle around because I was curious. And that was my first real hands-on dissection experience. It was the first time I'd seen a cadaver. I saw a cadaver in high school. My advanced biology class went into the Harlem School of Podiatry, and we had something like John Belushi take us on a tour of a bunch of legs. That was all that was left at that time. Sort of hammy pelvises and legs, and he was yanking on tendons and making toes wiggle. And I didn't eat chicken for 2 years after that. But it was just horrifying. And I sort of, something deep inside of me knew that I could, if ever I was in the circumstance of teaching that, it would happen very differently than
Mm-hmm.
that kind of approach. Because I realized you really go into an altered state when you're around cadavers for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And that altered state on the part of the guide can be either respected and worked with carefully to the person's advantage, or it can be trivialized and played with in a way that's either irrelevant and makes no use of the learning opportunity, or is even damaging. So I take my responsibility super seriously in the lab. We have a great time. We laugh mostly at my expense, and have a really good time. But I'm always extremely conscious of the immensity of the experience, to the depth of the psyche for the people who are present there, whether they know it or not,
Mm-hmm.
and that state that people enter when they're in that milieu is for me just a tremendous responsibility and opportunity to serve those people in that moment, because in that state you can say pretty much anything to a person. You can open any door that may have been closed, because you're walking in the land of taboo. You might as well go all the way.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. That's I mean, there's a from watching a number of your videos, there's a clear reverence for life with a irreverence for most everything
everything
else.
else. Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right, because yeah, I don't know, that's just my personal mix.
Well,
I don't know how yeah, that's just somehow I showed up with a comic sensibility for the most serious things. um,
it works great.
yeah, yeah,
As far as the audience goes,
yeah. In
but
fact, I don't think a year goes by where someone doesn't say, Gil, if you ever give up anatomy, you should go into comedy. And I'm like, I don't think I could do comedy without the anatomy.
bring a cadaver on stage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, that's interesting though. You're talking about the just being in the presence of that though, of I guess everybody has to kind of look at what's the difference between that and me. I guess
Yeah.
it really kind of does smack you right in the face of
It's like a
existence.
friggin' baseball bat to the back of your head when you walk in a lab. And if you've never seen that before,
Yeah.
it's like, it's jarring,
Yeah.
and yet compelling. And so it's like this, it's like meeting both sides of the magnet at the same time. You're like pulled in and pushed away at the same time. You're
Yeah.
pushed away by all the resistance in you to you know to that. And then really I find it boils down to intention and permission. When you're showing up in a circumstance where the donor and their family have basically asked you to learn from them, right? So there's an invitation there that gives you permission.
Yeah.
And so when your intention is to learn, then the job becomes to open up the gift, every bow, every wrapper, everything. Go in there and discover, encounter, be amazed. And then you're serving not only your own intention to learn, but their wish, that they could make an offering to your learning. So it's a two-way exchange that happens in there, and yet it requires incredible boldness on both parties' parts, because on the part of the donor, they had to say, wow, I think I'm not going to need this thing at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that strange? Because we're very attached and identified with our bodies. And then on the receiving end, you have to say, I think I'm going to cross the threshold of my anxiety due to the incredible potency of my interest. The horror has come is outweighing my fear. I'm sorry, my interest, is outweighing my horror and fear. And so on both sides, there's like an overcoming of the relationship to the body. And that makes for a cool learning experience. And also, you could do it otherwise. I mean, it's not like every dissection that's happening out there is inviting you to the deepest experience of yourself. But mine are.
So take that as warning, everybody.
Yeah, take that as a warning. That's what I'm in it for.
No, it is like just as so a few weeks ago, I was going back through your and watching a number of the videos on your website, and so I was I'd been in bed, and my lady Daniela passed out. We were watching Netflix. She passed out, so I said, "Oh, I'm gonna put back Gil
Time
in
to
some
put
anatomy,"
on.
And so she wakes up at one point. She's like, "What are you watching?" I'm watching this dissection. She's like, gross. Goes back to sleep, and then 10 minutes later, she wakes up and she woke up right when you were inflating the lungs.
Oh gosh.
And her initial reaction was like ew, gross.
Yeah.
And then, oh my God, that's beautiful.
Awesome.
And for days afterwards, she was like, I'm so grateful I got to see that. That
Mm.
was unbelievable,
Mm.
just watching the unfurling and the spirals and
Yeah.
lungs working in a way that is so much more beautiful than most people would think, more than I would have thought if I hadn't seen that, and she was really grateful. And I just
Mm.
thought you'd like to hear that. But it's a
Well, it's
testament
very
to,
gratifying because
yeah,
I mean, she was able to see what I see,
yeah,
which is kind of, I don't want to make it my goal that everyone sees what I see, but if you could see what I see, you'd be amazed.
yeah,
Not to say you wouldn't be amazed by seeing what you see from your own perspective, but I do my best to try and help people to see what I see, because it's changed my life to see the things I've seen and to
yeah.
see them the way that I do. So
Well, there's so much beauty in there, and so to be able to
yeah,
see beauty where someone didn't see beauty or might have seen horror or
right,
disgust, and then to see
exactly.
beauty, holy cow.
And isn't that like the nature of the whole trip on Earth, right? Because if you can come here in this fucking mess and see the beauty,
Yeah, yeah,
boom,
yeah,
you might not
yeah.
come back. Because isn't that what it means to, on Earth as it is in heaven, right?
Hmm.
So to me, that's to say that we can, that there is beauty to be seen here, that there is connection to be seen here, that the whole formula is already solved right here.
Right.
And and then, so let's hang with that for a little bit. What I used to ask the question years ago. I haven't asked it out loud in a while, but I still hold the question. What do you do if you're already in heaven? Like what, well, now what? Like, do you just like strum your damn harp and sing joyful songs to the Lord? What do you do when you're moving through the world in a state where you perceive beauty?
Hmm.
Because then do you fold? Is that it? Or is there like another level that we don't even know about? Do you serve? That's like the bodhisattva, right? Where
Hmm.
it's like the bodhisattva has her awakening, and then she dedicates her future lives to service of suffering humanity as an enlightened one. It's like, I don't think it has to be that rarefied.
Yeah,
It's just like, well, instead of trying to, you know, fix the world's problems, maybe the fixing comes in the perceiving,
yeah,
of the beauty in the mess, and then the behavior changes right there and then.
yeah,
You won't act the same way. You won't hold the same anxieties, and you won't be limited in terms of the energy you could channel, by your fear that it's
yeah.
not right somehow, that somehow this isn't right, and that can take you back to that moral question.
Hmm.
It's like, is anything really wrong? I know I feel it. I feel like something's wrong when I turn on the news, or when I think about certain relationships or whatever,
Hmm.
and you're like, it doesn't feel right. But but then it's like, well, where is that feeling located? Is that in this larger body? Or is it just in this little one? If I could perceive the larger experience, things might not feel so wrong. No.
Well, as you just mentioned about, I mean, fear is part of what creates a separation, or the perception of separation, and and then things are more likely to feel wrong when
Yeah.
when they
Yeah. Yeah.
feel separate,
Yeah.
or isolated, um, alone, ostracized. I've
Hmm.
certainly experienced those feelings, and I mean, I know in my life, part of the counteraction to depression was connection,
Mm.
and sometimes that's with other people, and sometimes that's in the woods with the sun and the birds,
Hmm.
and that connection. But either way, it's the interconnectedness
Yeah.
reduces the solitude. And I know, I mean, and clearly a fear reaction, we kind of just curl up into a little ball and isolate
Yeah.
from other things. And um, I guess that's part of the trick, is to catch that and keep coaxing it open, and
Hmm.
strengthening the connections and all that jazz.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's there's a sometimes it's hard to know, like you said though, like sometimes it's hard to know what to do when you're wide open and you feel connected to everything. It's like it's beautiful, and I want to step really carefully so I don't crush a worm, and I may not be terribly productive in that state of mind. Maybe that's fine, and maybe that's a problem. I don't
Well,
know.
I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I don't. Again, I don't say it to say maybe we'll stop doing stuff, but rather to say how would our agency manifest,
Hmm.
from, if we could settle into our perceptions of connection and beauty, how would that change the things we do? I don't think we would do less. I think we might be more creative and more productive than ever, actually,
Probably
because
right.
it's kind of the nature of consciousness to unfold itself in different directions and to permutate. And like we talked about, there's the infinite fractal ingress and there's the infinite fractal outgress,
Right.
so there's the emanation and the return, in other words. And so that agency manifesting is just this relentlessly creative and productive
Yeah.
process of consciousness getting excited about its own edges. Um,
Consciousness exploring itself is part of what you. That's part
yeah,
of what you do.
it's just the great masturbating God.
Right.
Right. Just stroking its head.
That's funny. I actually drew an image of that when I was in college, and it horrified most of the people who saw it, so I got rid of it.
Just the very quote I can see out there at some point, like
Yeah.
Gil Hedley said, like, "Oh, help me."
Boil it all down.
It's all, yeah.
The
Really,
one thing you remember.
let's sum it up here.
No, but I think you assuaged my fears that if we were, you know, walking in beauty wouldn't be productive. I think you're absolutely right that actually sparks the creativity and
yeah,
that connection, that the flow of life is
yeah.
actually far more
It
productive.
opens up the channels. Doesn't
Yeah,
shut them off. It's
yeah,
the channels are narrowed by fear. It's like the air can't get out of the balloon, just squeaking out. Um, it's resistance. If there's no resistance, then things really move.
yeah.
Gets exponentially interesting.
So that makes me think about differential movement within the body.
Differential movement. I love that phrase. I must have made it up. I don't know. That is, to me, maybe there's a simpler way to put it. There's an awful lot of syllables in differential movement, but somehow that's like the concept of once you get your head around what that means, differential movement starts making you curious about how does that happen? What are the mechanics behind that? What is the anatomy behind that? Maybe everything is differential movement, and it's just different speeds. I mean, in other words, I like to use the comparison of a tree bark. That a tree bark won't do this,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe it kind of does, but it just at a very, very imperceptible rate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but from our human animal perspective of differential movement, I mean, we're slippery folk.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
within the total connectivity.
Yeah, which is like crazy, right? That's the
Right,
thing. How do you
right.
get total connection and differential movement? And that to me is just a real puzzler. And I've enjoyed for my own enjoyed exploring that for my own sense of how it happens, and I'm sure it's richer than my simplification of it. But even my simplification of it is hard won.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. Our models and our gross simplifications are better than nothing, you know, because if
Hmm.
you got nothing, it's just like a puzzle. But once you start to like throw out some ideas, maybe figure this out, how does it happen? Because even I mean, I in the video, the What's the Fuzz tour talk,
Hmm.
you know, I kind of break it down into two modes, you know, basically differential movement, you know, via shearing fascia and differential movement via fluids. But in either case, you have total continuity, right? Even with the fluid, because even our minds will insist that since it's only a fluid interface and there's no fascial connection, it's not really connected,
Right.
you know. But tell that to the glass slip on the glass slide with a drop of oil in between the two. Tell it that it's not connected. It's connected.
Hmm.
You know, it's continuous,
Hmm.
and it'll snap if you pull it up the wrong way.
Yeah.
It's because that's the adhesive properties are very strong between a fluid, you know, fluid surface.
Yeah. Oh, and
Um,
and I mean, the even those fluid mediums, you know, those were a lot of the, you know, for a long time, all neurotransmitters were through, you know, fluid. They're floating, you know, and hormones would float in between the water, you know, from one cell to another, you know, and we contained a lot of that. But yeah, even that, I mean, you know, looking at some of the, like, you know, underwater colonies and stuff and thinking about that, and it's like that's a real puzzler for where are the boundaries of
mm,
containment, you know, like
mm,
where are the edges of this organism or this colony of organisms, you know. And
yeah,
um, but
just a school of fish. If that doesn't blow your mind,
right,
when they
right.
all turn and turn and turn,
Hmm.
or when you see the birds, starlings.
Totally.
I was
Yeah.
driving on that tour and had to pull the car, had to pull my camper over because I was watching a murmuration happen with a flock of starlings, and it was just
Yeah.
mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. I mean, your mind's categories are your mind is blown.
Yeah.
If you take that in for what it is, your mind is blown. It just blows out all the circuits of linear thinking, mechanical thinking.
It's a funny thing about often close observation will destroy preconceived notions of reality,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
and then, you know, people react differently to that. So a lot of people ignore their own observations. Um, and then there's people who acknowledge them, and sometimes they sound a little crazy.
Very true. Both statements are very true.
Yeah,
We'd rather believe a lie
yeah,
than a difficult truth. That's for sure.
yeah,
And sometimes it takes work to learn the truth, and we'd also rather. It's sometimes it's laziness,
sure,
and sometimes it's more the terror of the dismantling of a reality.
yeah,
Um, I have suffered that terror. I've been dismantling my reality for decades now.
yeah,
And like you say, you know, you can seem a little crazy at some point, the stuff that comes out of your mouth
yeah,
when you really push on things, but also the things we say and hold dear and obvious are patently ridiculous. um, I mean,
right,
I was as faithful a Catholic as you Pope could ever hope for,
yeah,
you know, and I took as seriously as, you know, I've taken the body. Before I did that, I took seriously the teachings of the church.
yeah,
You know, I took them with utmost seriousness and got a PhD in Catholic church teachings, you know, in order to satisfy my own impulse to take the teaching seriously and to see if they held water, basically.
hmm.
Said the very wet man. doused, doused by the by the leakage of his former faith.
Soaking in holy water.
Soaking in holy water. Yeah, soaking in holy water. But you can't say I didn't take it seriously.
Well,
Uh,
I'm curious to know, was there like a epiphany or a crisis of faith, or was there just step by
Yeah,
step by
about
step?
100 of them, more
Yeah.
like it was, you know, I love to remember, and my still dear friend Jeff, my roommate in grad school, or one of my roommates, I nicknamed him the Dogma Crusher because we shared a double in this big old house, and we'd hit the lights and it was time for bed, and we'd both be lying there before falling asleep, and he'd be like, "Gil, do you really believe dot dot dot?" You know, we were both these pious Catholic boys, and and I'd be like, "Oh, he's gonna do it again. He's gonna take away another one of my cherished beliefs." Uh, you know, so it's really incremental. You know, working on, you know, church teachings, or working on my personality.
Hmm.
You know, where'd that come from, and what's
Hmm.
that all about, and what are the cherished notions I hold about that, or about, you know, our sense of nation or
Hmm.
family, or our sense of uh, reality.
Yeah.
You know, so in other words, once you start poking holes in one set of beliefs, you know, and that balloon is deflated, and you realize you're holding a whole fistful of balloons, and you got to go at go at everything from a number of different angles,
Yeah.
um, to really drill down on what's going on here. So,
Yeah. No,
you know,
I can relate to what you're talking about. One of the things that I've kind of observed is that, I mean, a lot of folks are just content to have beliefs, and they kind of sit there, and that's fine, you know. But if you really try to live your beliefs and you try to explore them, then you'll start finding edges
yeah.
and places where they drop off, or that
Hmm.
there's walls, or you know. And that's when you start running into problems, when you really try to follow these teachings all the way out.
Yep.
How does it work, you know?
Yep.
And
How's that working out for you?
yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a very nice way to put it. And so I've pushed a lot of my own boundaries that way, and you know, you don't even know what your boundaries are until you cross them,
Right.
you know, sometimes egregiously, and find out, oh, well, actually that was a pretty good one. You know, you know, now being on the far side of that one,
Right.
I think I'll retreat back to it. And other ones are just dissolved permanently. You know,
Yeah.
you cross them, and it's like, that was just bullshit." You know, that one I'll never pick up again. That was just
Yeah.
a really very false way of seeing things. So some stuff just can't be rescued once it's been exposed.
Yeah.
And then other stuff, you're like, okay, that's pretty functional. I'm gonna run with
Hmm.
that one. Uh,
I also grew up Catholic, although I stopped. I didn't go nearly as far down that road as you. But it's interesting because my lady and I are both kind of ex-Catholics. You know, we
mm,
both were kind of raised Catholic until somewhere in the early teen years,
mhm,
and it wasn't until we'd been together for a few years and realized that's a real cultural foundation that we share.
mhm.
You know,
Oh
and there
yeah,
is.
it's deep.
Yeah, the
It's cellular, that
cosmology
stuff.
of
Yeah.
it
Oh yeah.
is very. I've played it out way more than I realized, because I thought I stopped being a Catholic when I was like 11,
Uh
um,
huh.
but I definitely did not. Cosmologically, the structure and order of the universe and the
Yeah.
values, like I did. That stuck with me a long time, and it's still very much part of this structure. I don't know how to separate it all. You know, some things have changed a lot, but that fundamental cosmology, and even,
Mhm.
you know, even just looking from Catholic to other Protestant, you know,
Mhm.
we have a fundamental different way things got structured early on. You know,
Yeah. That's
um,
right.
it's fascinating looking at that stuff. You know,
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I have a lot more appreciation for the Catholic tradition now than I did for a while.
It's got a lot going for it, actually. I mean, I found it to be a very rich tradition to be raised in, but I found my edge when I had my own children,
Mm-hmm.
and then I had to make the decision: do I want to raise them in that tradition? And I realized I couldn't. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's one thing for me to kind of unwind the knots that were tied in being raised under that worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was part of my task on this walkabout, is to unwind that imprinting,
Yeah.
to heal it. But I don't see any reason to actually wound someone on purpose consciously, and then so that they can then figure it all out later. So I gave my kids a pass on that. I don't know if I did them a favor, or I mean, it's been a rich thing for me
Mm-hmm.
to be underneath that worldview and then to come out from it. That movement has been extremely potent learning experience, which I've denied them for never having put them through it. But that's, again, it's like, what do you do if you're already in heaven? You know, maybe if you're spared 20 or 30 years of figuring that stuff out, you know, or 50, you know,
Yeah.
then maybe you get a head start. And I can see that actually in my kids. They don't carry quite the weight that I did at their age.
Nice. That's good.
Yeah,
Good job, Dad.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's interesting with the I I didn't raise any, I haven't raised my kids in any specific traditions. I've walked in and out of
Mhm.
traditions and sat in many circles, but you know, there's times I've lamented not having um, more of a ceremonial life, more of a
Mm.
structured ceremonial life with the kids. But
Mhm.
who knows? Um,
Yeah, I feel that too. Like
yeah,
I had you had those big markers,
yeah,
and you know, school gives you some of those. You can graduate. My son's about to graduate college. You know, that's like a big step. You know,
that's
my
a big
daughter
deal.
got married. That's a step. You know, so life will still throw you some opportunity to mark events,
Yeah,
but
sure, sure.
that calendar, I lived that calendar. You know, that liturgical calendar. I lived
Hmm.
that calendar for decades of my life,
Mm.
and I missed it for a little bit, and then I was so far out of it that whenever I go back and look at it, it literally looks like I've walked in late on a play. You know, you know, when you come into the theater and the whole audience is wrapped and into the story, and you come in and you're outside of it,
Hmm.
just like looking at it, and it just seems odd.
Yeah.
Uh,
Did I know you were heavily influenced by Saint Francis. Um, oh, I thought I heard you
yeah.
say that at some point. Did you get into a lot of austerities as well, personally? Or,
Oh my goodness.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I was very I leaned very ascetical,
yeah.
and you know, I I can't say that was necessarily my shiningest moments, uh, because I have been through periods of intense asceticism and scrupulosity, moral scrupulosity, which is more of a mental disorder than a productive path of sanctification.
I'm not
Um,
familiar with the scrupulosity.
Scrupulosity is it's kind of like an OCD of your moral mental state.
Okay, so just hyper examining yourself.
Yeah, hyper examining, and you just can't get clean. You know,
Yeah,
no matter how many times you wash your hands, no matter how many times you confess your sins, you just still feel dirty.
yeah,
So it's kind of it's I was susceptible to that in my youth.
yeah.
And St. Francis was no help. You know, he was like if this dude is like in his own mind the biggest sinner in the world, and what the fuck am I? You know, I
Right.
must be really bad. You know, and then I just realized he was mentally ill. You know? and needed to see, some good, get a good counseling session with someone who knew better. And yet at the same time, he was a person of just indescribable enthusiasm and devotion,
Mm-hmm.
And these things often go together,
Yeah.
Agnes of God, what is it? Is she crazy or is she holy? And it's like, yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
Ramakrishna, is he crazy or is he holy? Yes. He's a crazy holy man. And yet something like scrupulosity, just like any OCD kind of behavior, is ultimately an impossible constraint under which to ultimately express the true joy,
Mm-hmm.
of that opened life. So it's just something you got to heal from. Uh, I managed to get out of it somehow.
Yeah, it's interesting how much of that the it's not just Catholic tradition, many traditions, how many create that feeling of separation
Yeah.
that we were talking about before,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um, and almost unworthiness, a shame, and
Oh, yeah.
uh,
Well, that was the mantra that ultimately, like a shoehorn, dislodged me from the church. When in the Eucharistic prayers, you'd say, Lord, I am not worthy to receive you, but only say the word and I shall be healed. I've actually changed that prayer a little bit. I noticed the last time I was showing up at a family funeral or something.
uh,
But to say, I was like, I can't repeat those words anymore. I just don't believe them.
yeah,
In other words, if you haven't already healed me and made me worthy, it ain't going to happen today. In other words, that happened a long time ago.
yeah,
That happened thousands of years ago. So I can't abide by repeating words that pretend that nothing has already happened and that the healing isn't already arrived.
yeah,
Uh, I wasn't about to teach those words to my children. Um,
yeah. Strange how a path towards the divine can also reinforce the separation from the divine, or the sense of separation from the divine.
yeah.
Weird.
Well, yeah. I mean, I won't go too conspiracy theory on you, but I think at certain levels, there's some consciousness about
Right.
those forms of control that do actually perpetuate
Yeah.
separation. But despite that darker backdrop, people just keep on connecting, and that's the beautiful thing, right? In other
Yeah.
words, even if you put a bunch of people together to feel unworthy, they'll ultimately help each other, pat each other on the back, do service for one another, fall in love, make
Right.
babies.
Right.
So you just can't stop the procession towards higher consciousness.
Yeah. 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 And even within, as you're talking, it reminded me of a lot of the old European great artists, and it's like, on the one hand, for several hundred years, you were pretty much only allowed to make religious art in a lot of places in Europe. I may have some issues with that concept, but the result is anyone who truly connected to the divine on any level through their artwork. I mean, man, there's some incredible collections of artwork, in the Catholic tradition and in the old European traditions. And so it's like, yeah, you can, like you said, people keep connecting.
Yeah,
no matter what,
yeah.
no matter what form or what words or.
I was just at the Kultur Forum in
Uh,
Berlin, which is a collection of museums with the Gemüse Gallery, I think it's called, or something like that. And it's old European masters and all of that church art from thousands of years when that was the only thing you were allowed to do, right? Or for
right.
however long.
Right.
And there's just like infinite iterations of Saint Sebastian being skewered with with arrows, and because he was like they could draw a male nude. That was the whole point. In other words, Saint Sebastian's martyrdom was your chance to make a beautiful picture of a naked male body.
Huh.
Much like Jesus on the cross. It's like,
Yeah.
you want to draw a naked male body, it's got to be in this position.
Right.
And then they went all out with it. They gave him bricks on his belly, or they, I mean, they explored anatomy as best as they could within that, container. Interesting.
Funny creatures.
We have ranged far afield from fascia.
And yet it's all right there.
All right there.
Fascia in the medieval drawings, and
Yeah.
their slightly different understanding of it. Yeah, should we talk about maybe fascia for a moment?
Only if you want to.
I feel a certain.
I'm not pressed.
You're not pressed. I feel a certain obligation to talk a little bit more about fascia. If anybody's
Okay.
made it this far, well, if they made it this far, then they're interested in whatever we're talking about. So, but it is amazing. I mean, one of the things I was thinking about was the fascial sleeve for the pacemaker. Holy shit. You remember what I'm talking about? And
yeah, sure.
Videos and just the things like that the body can do, that the body, how the way the body adapts and
oh yeah,
problem solves. And
yes, and that particular example, which we can visualize for your listeners or watchers, is just to say that when you get something implanted, the body, your T cells will come sniffing along, and they'll be like, well, that's not the guy, that's not the guy. And you attack it, but that piece of metal doesn't really care. And so, ultimately your body just walls off foreign bodies. If it can't push it out, it can't digest it, it'll encapsulate it. And that's true for a breast implant or for a pacemaker or defibrillator or whatever else you stick in yourself. People put in whatever, or they'll put in a pad here if a guy's chest is too caved in looking. I've taken, people, there's all kinds of cosmetic surgeries for, people put butt enhancements, or, and the body just sees these things as, as not itself. And then walls it off. And then when it goes cruising past it, it's like, okay, that's not me. I don't, nothing to see here, folks. And you just move along. But the tissue that it forms is a fascinating one to me. And it really depends on how much movement potential there is in the area. But it can also limit movement tremendously, particularly the breast implants, which will kind of create a creeping encapsulation over the rib cage that then, really limits the movement of the ribs and breathing.
Really?
Yeah.
That's makes sense. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
And I mean, I think there should be like a couple more pages in the brochure about that personally, explaining that this is going to require maintenance, if you're not to lose function. But to be honest, most, people were not operating at 100%. They were operating at 20% or 30%. And if you lose even 50% and you're only operating at 30%, you're not even going to notice it. You'd have to lose 75 or 80% to even notice something was wrong. That's really, I think, how most people are with their sense of their body. I mean, if you're an athlete or Tai Chi guy, or you're going to notice minute losses of performance. But if you're just spending your whole life in a chair, you could lose a lot of performance and not miss it.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, and even, I mean, I was an athlete for years and didn't feel much in my body. I mean, part of what I was good at was blocking out sensations.
Yeah.
So that
you could drive past those things.
That's right. And then there was a lot of good things in that, but then some of those, you end up creating problems and deal with them later. And, but the kind of the Tai Chi and the Qigong and the softer stuff, the embodiment, body scanning, that's a whole different way of feeling. And then sometimes, sometimes I've gone too far at that, where it's hard to stay on task because there's all these sensations coming through my body,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, but yeah, um, yeah, I would agree with you. Most of us, most of the time, most folks aren't, just don't need to, or don't think they.
Aren't there for it.
Yeah.
So tell me, what amazed you in particular about that encapsulation that you saw? What was the aha for you, or the whoa ho?
It was so, I think I would have expected some like kind of gummy glob around a foreign object that was just
Mm,
like kind of tied and restricted. And it was like a freaking pocket. It was like a sleeve that was just neat and tidy. It was like one of the most
mm.
neat and tidy things I've ever seen inside a body.
I I I hear you, and
Yeah.
the first time that I saw the encapsulation of a breast implant,
Hmm.
I thought that it was like some kind of Tupperware container that the surgeons had put in.
Yeah.
Like I thought that it was so perfect,
Yeah.
like you're saying, uh, that I thought, oh, I didn't realize that they put like a container in for a breast implant. And it's like, oh no, you grew that, that
Yeah.
it blew my mind.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, well, and another thing, if I can just, since we got back to fascia, I figured
yeah,
should ask you a couple questions about fascia before we
sure.
go off again. But it's funny, when I was asking, I asked some friends of mine on Facebook group, if they had what questions they might have, and one of them, from my friend Yusha, and my Cobra Kai, I'll say his name. Um, he asked if you could transplant fascia, and at first I was a little dismissive, like, I don't think that's quite how it works, and then saw you talk about some surgeons that had cleaned the fascial matrix around an organ, and where I'd been experimenting with injecting stem
Well, they
cells.
absolutely do that.
Yeah, yeah. Can you talk about this for a moment?
Yeah. I mean, that's where organ recovery is going.
Yeah,
Is to basically rinse the cells, of an organ so that only the fascial scaffolding remains, or the connective tissue scaffolding. Really, you want to get linguistically accurate anatomically. So the connective tissue scaffolding uh, is a very potent thing in itself,
it makes perfect sense.
as a pattern for. And then you just inject stem cells onto that, and turns it into a bladder again, or a kidney, or a heart someday. I guarantee you, they're going to be doing this with every organ in your body.
It's amazing, but they've had
Uh,
really good success with this.
I don't know what the success rate is for that at this point, or whether it's still in development. All I can tell you is it's happening.
Yeah,
Um, that's where it's going.
yeah. And
It's
it's really cool just thinking about that. I mean, what an
yeah.
elegant solution,
And
to.
also, I mean, to take your friend's question further, I mean, they use cadaver ligaments and stuff, and I mean, there's all kinds of uses that are made of tendinous material
Very true.
and such. So that's a perfectly legit
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, looking at tendons and ligaments, it's a little more
Yeah.
clear, neat and clean.
Hmm.
Um,
I mean, I don't know if they're trans. I don't know if there's any cause to be like transplanting the rectus sheath or something like that, but who knows? I mean, people get in some gnarly accidents in a
yeah,
wood chipper, and I don't see any reason why not.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. No, that's cool. So speaking of, so so having a
what other
background.
questions did your friends ask?
Oh, they asked all kinds of good questions. Let's see.
Not that I'm like, the answer button, but it's
Well,
fun to talk about it with you and see if we can muse together.
yeah. Well, one thing I know this is. Well, can you talk to me about thixotropy and piezoelectricity.
Sure. So, I'm no chemist really, but the thixotropic effect is references the shifting of a substance from basically a solid state to a gel.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I got that backwards. It's from a gel state to a solution. It's not a solid, it's rather a solution. So it's funny because I made that error many times in the past. It's a verbal one that's easy to make. But the basic concept is with the introduction of energy, say heat or pressure, you could shift something that's sort of solidified as a gel into a solution, You can liquefy it, say temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
And that these sol gel transitions are happening, in the physical world around us. And it was that effect that was used when I was training as a rolfer to explain, what we were doing. Like we talked way earlier in the conversation, when someone asked, "What are you doing?" Well, rolfers were asked that too, and they were asking it themselves, "What are we doing?" And one of the answers that they came up with was, that the idea that connective tissue could be transitioned manually from a gel into solution, and then it would become sort of more malleable, right? And then you could, we'd say fascia is a plastic medium, and then we would induce the thixotropic effect with our elbows or our fist or our fingers of steel, and then sort of put it where it belongs. If it wasn't where it belonged by our body reading, we'd try and put it there. And so when I was in my rolfing training, Robert Schleip was my instructor, who's still my friend, and we were out there in Goeben together just this past week. So I've had a nice long run with Robert. He's a great guy. For your listeners, Robert Schleip was a Feldenkrais guy, and then he was a rolfing instructor, and before that he was a psychologist, and now he got a PhD basically researching fascial contractility, and is like a professor at University of Ulm in Germany, where he also founded the Fascia Congress with Tom Finley. So he's a leader in our field, and also a really sweet guy.
I read some of his articles. I had no idea he had all that background, and that's amazing that he was your teacher.
And before all that, he was following Osho out, and he's a really interesting guy.
Nice.
And got a really funny too. So anyway, Robert, during my rolfing training, was challenging that story that we were inducing the thixotropic effect, because he said basically it would take the weight of an elephant to induce the thixotropic effect in the fascia. So we must be doing something else. And he never really found out what that something else was, but he did find out a bunch of other things. I think actually that it's true we're not inducing the thixotropic effect in what we call deep fascia or dense regular fibrous connective tissue. I think it's highly unlikely that we're inducing the thixotropic effect in that tissue, and it's a good thing that we can't, because I wouldn't want to, because that's like exoskeleton to us. It's so essential a structural support to our skeleton that if we were to induce the thixotropic effect, you'd be fucked up. In other words, I want my ligaments and my dense fascia to be keeping things together, right? However, the stuff that I describe as perifascia or filmy fascia or perifascial membranes in that What's the Fuzz tour talk, I think we possibly are inducing the thixotropic effect in that much more liquid tissue, and that it does become sort of more gelatinous. And I actually think our touch very well does induce, for all intents and purposes, a thixotropic effect or something like it, moving it from a more, what I call a gummy state into a more slippery state, which is its nature and optimal for movement. Differential movement requires slippery perifascia. If the perifascia is dehydrated or gummy or stuck in its own self, we're not going to have the level of differential movement that's intrinsic to our design. So there's a little bit about thixotropic effect from a guy who doesn't really know much about it. Piezoelectricity is a totally different phenomenon. That is definitely operative in the deep fascia.
Yeah.
And basically it means pressure electricity, piezoelectricity. So that when certain types of substances, basically crystals, you know, are distorted, they generate a field, an electromagnetic field. And that's how record players worked. You know, that's how you played your vinyl, was you dragged a crystal through a groove and the crystal vibrated and generated an electrical field which transmits down a wire and gets rectified and amplified and turned into the sound of the jiggling, you know, which was Mick Jagger or whatever. So similarly, our liquid crystal in fascial tissues, which are constantly being distorted by our movements in gravity, are generating electrical fields.
Cool.
Which I would extrapolate are a form of communication, you know, to the whole body.
Yeah.
That might not be true, but at the very least, I'm always looking for other kinds of whole body communication systems, and it strikes me that distortions of field phenomenon are communicative to, you know, and interactive with other fields that are generated in the body in a way that is information.
Almost kind of, how could it not be? But
how could it not be?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that is something that I don't know how hush hush, you know, people who want to be taken seriously have to be about fascia as kind of or the fascial web, the connective tissue web as a communication and information network or not. And, you know, I mean, certainly, you know, a lot of the kind of more tactile approaches to it associated with emotional holding and memories, and a lot of really interesting things happen. Um, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. And even, I mean, alternative theories of nerve conduction are based on the reality of piezoelectric phenomenon in the connective tissue. So that perineural sheath is a fibrous connective tissue sheath that wraps the nerves. The standard theory of nerve conduction has to do with, you know, a chemical phenomenon, you know, the action potential moving down the axon to the synapse. There are other competing theories. That is a theory. Usually the theory that wins out, people think is a fact, but it's actually still just a theory. That theory of the action potential. And there's a competing theory that suggests that the brain actually generates like pressure waves, and that the pressure wave is actually traveling down the neural sleeve or distorting it. And as that distorted pressure wave moves down the neural sheath, it's actually the piezoelectric effect occurring as the fabric of the neural sheath distorts. That is the action potential. And I think that's really cool. It's just another way of, you know, of explain. And the people, of course, who are the proponents of that theory believe that it solves more problems and explains more phenomenon than the, you know, the reigning theory of the action potential, but I just like it because it actually includes an acknowledgement of the piezoelectric effect and also offers a function to it that might have been overlooked otherwise.
Yeah, and there's a kind of that characteristic organic life pulsation
Yeah,
going through,
yeah, exactly. And or just I like to call the diaphragm the pleuroperitoneal muscle, right? Because on its north side, it's covered in the pleura,
uh-huh.
and on the underside, it's covered in the peritoneum, both of which are, kind of extensive fabrics, right, that envelop and are distorted by every breath.
Hmm.
So I think of these visceral fascia as maybe field generating,
Hmm.
and that so that the breath is, distorting the peritoneum and the pleura 20,000 times a day, and that the field is generated by the distortion of those fabrics would be a voice in the body that basically announces the character and quality of that iteration of breath.
That makes me, I mean, that reminds me of a lot of the breathwork practices, a lot of the, specifically, some of the practices where you're directing breath to, well, Dantian is a standard one in
Mhm.
Taoist traditions, but there's different ways of directing it. And you're literally changing the fluid pressure through your abdomen with these
Yeah,
breath practices. And of course, it's going to affect the organs differently. And then the whole morphogenic field associated with them and the thixotropic effect, however you want to explain it. But like, wow, that all made it sound less woo-woo. The way you said it, not that I give a shit about whether it sounds woo-woo, but it's nice when it's like, oh no, that helped it anchor it into reality for me. The way you're talking about it, it's
mm.
nice to come from multiple angles.
Yeah,
But yeah, directing breath into fluid pressure into specific areas of the body,
mm.
um, it does some interesting things.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's that's cool. Thinking about the sheath
But
over the
but
organs.
far be it for me to get wrapped up in facts. I always like to say I'm the meaning guy. I leave the production of facts to other people.
Yeah, yeah. I think of you as a scientist, although
Well, that's hysterical because science is a religion that I don't subscribe to.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I mean, I say that jokingly, but
I get what you
'cause,
mean.
but yeah, there's just like I was talking about, sort of breaking down the Catholic teachings I was raised with, or the political teachings, or the reality consciousness teachings. Science has its serious dogma baggage that it carries and gets in its own way. And
Absolutely.
science in the purest sense, an idealized version of science, we can kind of get behind at some level if you're into mechanistic atheism. But um, at the same, so there's a lot to be learned from that model.
Hmm.
Sadly, politics and economics, you know, and power get get in the way of that
Yeah.
idealized version of. I mean, Christianity looks pretty sweet, when it's just like Jesus and the flower children, but you
Right.
throw in a couple of emperors and some popes, and it starts getting pretty violent.
Yeah.
And similarly with science, the idea of, hypothesis, experimentation, result, truth driven by observation, and that's lovely. But what we really have are grant writing professors and their PhD students who don't dare go against their professor because it would disrupt his reputation, I mean, you can go on and on about it, but
Yeah.
they have their institutions and their white coats uh, and their priesthood, so
Yep.
I actually cringe when people think I'm a scientist. A sculptor,
That'll be the last time I refer to you that
a
way.
philosopher.
Yeah.
I'll take artist philosopher over scientist anytime. But I do also appreciate and respect all that science has brought to us, just as I appreciate and respect all the Catholic Church has brought to us. And it's brought a lot.
Yeah.
Those museums would be plenty boring without the Catholic Church.
Or they'd be filled with something else. Who knows?
Yeah, well, that's very true. Like if it weren't filled with Saint Sebastian, what would be there?
Some other
Probably
guy with arrows. You know?
Apollo and Venus making out or something
Right.
like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
We've covered a lot of ground,
we've
fella.
covered a lot of ground, and there's infinite more. But I want to be respectful of your time. You've given a nice chunk of time, and I appreciate it very much.
It's been my pleasure. I've really enjoyed your company, Stephen.
Likewise, this has been a blast,
Mhm.
and I am very much looking forward to working with a body with you sometime.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Put it on your bucket list.
It's there. It's in the bucket. All right. Any parting words for us?
How about this? I really am on a mission to kind of democratize knowledge of the human body and to
Mm-hmm.
rebrand it in a positive way.
Yeah.
One tool I have available at my disposal for that is my website, which is just full of free stuff, as you know. It is truly a no obligation site. It asks for your email, but you don't have to check the box that says send me an email. And even if you did, I probably won't. I send out I use my MailChimp list about 3 times a year.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those people who's going to email you twice a week. So, and anyway, even if you put your email in, you don't have to, you make up your own password and you don't have to get an email back from me. Might be some auto responses involved with the enrollment, but when you do, there's a library for you that will be populated with 3 video courses for free. There's a gallery on the site. There's a clips gallery on the site. It's just like a free education on integral anatomy that pretty much represents my life's work.
Yeah.
So I'm just putting it out there. If you want to play with this stuff,
Yeah.
have a look.
I can vouch for that. It's an incredible amount.
Yeah.
It's an incredible amount of information for free with all the videos, hours and hours and hours of really high quality.
Yeah, it's the real thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have a bunch of stuff on YouTube, but really the majority is on the website because I like housing it there. It feels a little more safer as a sort of a container for these donor gifts who are precious to me.
Right on. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you. Take good care, Gil.
Bye.
Bye.